Characters. Love me a good character. There's a lot to love about Exard, and if you don't find something in the systems to cherish and hold on to like your first legally purchased Strongbow Dark Fruits, chances are you'll find something you adore in its characters. But who is the most loved? Every time you roll the online dice, you run up against someone else's virtual foam finger of choice. And with a decent size of players coming through on a week-to-week basis, maybe there's some value in knowing what finger you'll be dealing with. We can make some decently educated assumptions, I'm sure. It probably feels like we played against so much Johnny that we're doing 20xx bits all over again. However, finding any proof of who's playing who is surprisingly scarce. And unless you stay well outside of your bubble of friends, you might have a bias towards specific characters who show up more often than not. So I set out on a quest to find out who was the most popular, who was in the middle, and which characters you can burn all your notes on since they're never gonna show up. A quest that has run into a lot more trouble than I was expecting. My first idea was to simply take a note of which characters I ended up playing against. The obvious problem being that I am merely one man, and if we look at Exard's peak player counts on a daily average, there's roughly 200 people playing. My experience is pretty limited. I've only got so many hours in the day and I fill most of them with pretending to be productive, meaning whatever I could sample from this would be limited to whoever was willing to play me based on ping, skill level, or what rooms they decide to join in the first place. Alternatively, I could refresh the lobby browser and take a note of what characters are showing up from a distance. But again, this runs into some other issues. Excluding rooms not showing up despite the fact that they exist, and the one lone soul who hasn't realized that they shouldn't be searching ranked, based on my time zone I'd only ever see a specific set of players. And that also raises the question of how should you count duplicate players if they show up again after a refresh. I asked ComeyDev on Twitter for some solutions, one of the developers of the rollback updates, and they suggested a lot of good approaches, but ones that were substantially outside of my technical ability. I make video and do chroma key, C# not my thing. Maybe Krakatoa or Pangea would know more, I don't know. Running dry on options, I did the only thing I know how to do. Having amassed a following of people that my brain continuously tells me are only watching me because they hate me, I have a wide enough reach that I can kind of just ask who you play, and who you play is a secondary that might not be caught by just reading through player lobbies. Set up the form, let it sit for a while, forgot about it entirely, and now a couple of months later I've got a pretty sizable amount of responses. This is flawed, extremely. There's nothing to say that entry number 216 is actively playing, but this way I can reach people outside of my region and also outside of people that might be playing when I am. With 312 entries in the list that exceeds the average 24-hour player peak, I feel confident enough to say that this is a reasonable enough sample size of the English-speaking Exard players that we can say this probably is representative of most of the player base. 18 people play this game for Ramlethor's slippery little piglets. Out of the cast of 25, we managed to see a double-digit amount of characters not see a double-digit amount of mains. Zato and Chip in particular aren't too surprising to me as the most unpopular pals. Zato has a pretty high bar to entry, which I think discourages people from giving him a serious go, and Chip's low effective health and required understanding of many routes I'd imagine has people bounce off of him even if they do give him a go. More questionable to me is May and Leo. Leo I'd imagine just doesn't stick for people. I think a lot of people have a brief flirt with him and then feel like he's limited in scope. A fine character, but maybe a little bit hard to love. May being so few and far between tracks in my experience, however I still find it a little off. To me, the character comes across as an almost perfect character to grow with. She's ignorant enough that you don't have to put a large amount of time into her to have a good time, while also having the room to create really complex strategies and setups. If I had to take a guess, I'd imagine input managing your dolphins with negative edge probably contributes a bit to a lack of people's engagement with the character. But since there's still plenty you can do without that element of the character, I wouldn't be confident with that assumption. A character to lab, and a character to go fucking maybe, I guess, with. So it's very surprising to me to see her this low. Thankfully, Elfelt is real low, and not to run the bit into the ground, Jacko could be a little bit low for my own liking. Who cares though? Top 5 gamers. Number 5. It's a 3-way tie between Biken, Gunners Rise Up, Raven, Apes Together Strong, and Coom? I don't know about you, but this isn't representative of my experience in the slightest. Heihyun isn't rare, but they're a little bit uncommon. Raven makes sense, easy to play and simple to understand. Biken makes sense, lots of people who, no offense, really don't play gear often main her, which is pretty funny considering she's genuinely hard. I can go entire days without seeing Heihyun. I don't often spot the fleeting players playing them, and I don't spot the gamblers playing them. I don't know where they all are, but they showed up to the polls. Come Heihyun, go to the polls. This sucks. Number 4, Sin. I actually have nothing to say about Sin. He's such a who cares character to me, even though clearly enough people care about him to have him as their fave. Maybe they thought this was a GG2 poll. Number 3, Slayer. I have developed a secret hatred towards this character. The more I learn about this game, the less I understand about why Slayer does the things that he does and why I just lost the round. Where did my life go? Perhaps that damage output is why he's popular, though I'd imagine that some of his more evasive properties also go a decent way to why people remain attached enough to main him. I do think though that his teleporting dashes put me off, and I'd even say maybe you should give another type of character a go. Maybe May. Or the Time Splitters 2-8 might be more your speed. Number 2, Venom? Okay, I know this is wrong, but I don't think it's too wrong. Venom is pretty common, but absolutely not this common. I'd imagine, as someone who mains Venom and loves Venom, perhaps I've had some influence on people, and the type of person who would see this poll and respond to it are more likely to be persuaded into being ballheads. To play Basement Dweller's advocate though, I don't think that this is too far off. Aside from being decently common from my own anecdotal evidence, he's got a huge amount of expression and flexibility. If you want to be more defensive you can, more aggressive you can, and has strong enough buttons that you can kind of theory craft on the fly with just a little bit of time put in. Really, I think Venom is what you make of him. Perhaps I'm deluded in that. However, that's the reason I stick with him. Every time I lose, it feels like it's my fault because the character is so well-rounded while also being so mechanically unique that it always feels like I can bring a new perspective to the game to apply victory. He's the best. Wouldn't it be crazy if there was a whole game about it? Number 1, it's Soul. Most of the time I would be surprised if the poster boy was the most mained, but I fully understand why Soul is up here. He can be Ungus Bungus, but he's not too stupid. Like May, you don't have to play the most optimized Soul to be the most effective Soul, and being so conceptually simple, you get to use everything that you learn basically instantly. I do think that his roots, while very cool, can be a little bit hard to master beyond the really simple stuff, though maybe this comes back to the May concept of a character to grow with. The only thing that does make me confused is that with Soul being this high, I'm a little confused as to why Kai didn't make the list. Without a combo as flashy as Dustloop, he might not have the same allure, however in practice his diverse toolkit lets him flex into your playstyle, rather than Soul where you have to grapple with your inner ape a little bit more. Maybe if they'd voted a little harder they would have shown up at 5th, and a small discrepancy has led to a different history. I guess there's no real top 5 that would make sense in my mind, but Soul being at the top makes perfect sense. However, this doesn't paint the whole picture. You're not always playing your main, and when we start factoring in secondaries, we start to see some shifts in who's likely to end up on the other end of the Wi-Fi signal. With secondaries accounted for and letting people pick multiple secondaries, we get a picture that's much more accurate to the experience that's floating through the player lobbies. Axel, for example, sits around the average with 11 players if we only consider mains, but with merely 4 people playing him as a secondary, he ends up with much lower popularity, aligning himself with how rare he actually is to show up. Unfortunately, this doesn't end up affecting our bottom contenders. Chip and Zato are still sat at the bottom, and May slides even lower down the popularity rank. However, it does shake up the top 5 a little, bringing Kai back into where I feel like he should be as the tied 3rd most popular character alongside Venom. Slayer and Soul, however, maybe unsurprisingly, remain firmly at the top to the dismay of everyone who loves logic and reason. One thing we can see as a trend, though not exactly as a hard and fast rule, is that the general perception of character difficulty does seem to play a decent part in whether or not people will be playing the character. Typically, the harder the character to play, or maybe more specifically to learn, the lower the chances will be that they show up, with perhaps the most standout exceptions being Axel and Venom. But again, I think Venom is a little bit overrepresented because of who exactly was asked the question. Axel as a character though, I think can be a little bit hard to see the appeal, being a character who has to work very hard to maintain a lead while also being somewhat limited in the cool stuff. TK Bomber routes are very cool, but we can't spend all day finding the opportunity to do them. When you factor that in with how bad he is, being, in my opinion, bottom 3, I'd imagine that pushes people away from him. Speaking of quality though, we can pretty cleanly see that character strength doesn't play a role in character popularity, which makes sense. This isn't Melee, and depending on your level of play, which characters are best can roll around a lot. Axel, despite being thoroughly ass, might as well be top tier if you're playing within the 10-hour range. With most people agreeing Soul is pretty good, but nowhere near the best, along with the pretty diverse spread of who's playing who, I think we can look at this and say, Xrd is probably probably in a pretty healthy place when it comes to the spread of how frequently the game is going to shake up. I would, however, like to see someone more tech-savvy than me have a shot at gaining some more accurate data, and see if the public majority can be trusted to play who they say they're playing. I'm pretty sure we could do this with Sammy Mod. Maybe I'll look into it at some point and we can have like a yearly update. For now though, go and contribute to Xr's player numbers by rocking up to the player lobbies and rocking your favorite Bishi boy. I genuinely think that we might be in one of the best times to be playing Xrd, with everyone that's still playing just playing because they love it, and the rollback being so excellent. Maybe they just love Venom though, but that's also fine. Big Xrd video coming to the main channel soon, and I'll see you then. Or online, either or.